Hi, and welcome to the latest edition of the Leadership Untitled podcast with me, Rob Moores. This is the show that seeks to provide hints and tips and best practices, as well as a bunch of traps to avoid for all you leaders out there, either starting out on your journey or even if you are senior leaders. My guest this week is Lauren Waldman, a self-styled learning pirate and specialist in the neuroscience of learning. This conversation is a fantastic one and has got me personally thinking more about how the brain works when learning and beyond, if I'm honest, than I've ever done before. So please join me in welcoming Lauren to the show. Hi Lauren, welcome to the Leadership Untitled podcast. How are you today?
Hey, oh Rob, it's great. It's gorgeous. It's sunny outside after a week of doom and gloom in Toronto.
Well, you've just been telling me it's quite chilly over there, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's only the fake winter, so we're good.
Fake winter.
Fake winter for all my Canadians, they'll know what that means.
And then it's getting a bit warmer again at the weekend, yeah?
Yep.
Love it. We finally get together. So we've been trying to schedule this conversation, I think now for about 4 or 5 months. I think I've had to cancel it once, you've had to cancel it once, but we're here now. That's awesome.
Yes, yar.
I guess what I like to do is at the start of the episode, I like to just kind of say why it is I've approached the person that's the guest and why I've got interested by what they do. And with yourself, so if I go back, where are we now? Sort of 15, 16 months, as I was drawing to the end of the first season of this podcast, I was asking out on LinkedIn, who would you like to see? Is there anyone you'd like to see on LinkedIn or anywhere else you'd like to come on the podcast? And you got mentioned by a few people. And it's that long ago, I can't even remember who those people are now. But you were the only person on that list that I'd already seen and was following on LinkedIn as well. And, you kind of like and go, well, that's a definite. if I've seen that and I like it, and they've seen that and they like it, then we should chat. And I guess, the other side of it is, and we've just been chatting about this in the little preamble, is that from a neuroscience point of view, I've not had someone on the podcast so far that is sort of deeply influenced and involved in that side of it. Yes, most of the people I've spoken to reference it, and I said before to you, it's almost like a reference or a citation on a page about learning that, we should have a look at that. And loads of people quote things like, the neuroscience of trust because they've read the HBR article, something along those lines. But your entire kind of life and vocation now is around that. So I think to get a bit of a taster, how did you get involved in that? Tell us a bit about yourself and how you got involved in that stuff.
Oh, it was pure accident.
It normally is.
Always is, isn't it? I came from the background of L&D, and I'm still associated with the industry. And it was really just fluke. It was, after close to 14 years doing what I was doing, it started, as an academic, and then going into L&D as an instructional designer, and as then, lastly as a chief learning officer. And it was just, I was at a conference one day. It was that simple. And I was opening up for the keynote, and, I said, well, who's this person and what are they talking about? And they're like, oh, neuroscience and learning. I'm like, what now?
Yeah. What's that?
I'm like, oh. And all it took was, 45 minutes watching this person going, oh boy, so this is what I've been missing, huh? So, and that was that. It was game over. It was stop everything I'm doing, look into this a little bit further, and then become, I would say mildly, but it wasn't mild. It was like a full-blown obsession as to, I need to know everything that I could possibly learn about the brain, because I want to be a better instructional designer. Mm-hmm. I want to know, what is it that I'm really designing for, and how is it taking in information? How is it going to create those memories? And I know I've said this and people have heard me talk about this, but it was very intuitive when I used to design. I was always looking for other angles, but I don't think until I started, putting together the pieces of the brain that I understood why I was intuitively doing it that way. And then it was just a matter of, like you said, Rob, there's a lot of neurobabble out there in the industry, and there's a lot of people who look at the HBR, the wonderful, wonderful articles, or they pick up, the Neuroscience for Dummies book, and they're like, got it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh no. It's, we're dealing with literally the most complex thing on the planet. So, it needs we need to give it respect. And if you really want to dive into it, dive in. So that's what I did. I'm going for my fourth certification now.
Wow.
Yeah,
I
which
mean,
is
literally
where
is.
my
It's
head
like
is.
the most complex thing in the world, but at the same time,
Yeah.
it is absolutely the thing that drives everything we do. I mean, I'm in Simon Sinek's famous TED talk, and he talks about when he introduces the golden circle and start with why. And he's talking. Then he's like, we make these decisions, and we might say they're gut decisions. We might say we're leading with the heart. No, no, no. I hate to break it to you. Those other body parts aren't making any decisions. Everything happens up here, and you don't even realize what it is sometimes, but it's that controlling it.
Oh, amazing.
So I guess, from that point of view, you look at, I guess, two angles that this show looks at is the kind of learning side and the leadership side.
Mm.
Where have you found that you are generally deploying what you've learned when it comes to L&D? What are the challenges out there, and what's the response to it?
Woof. The response is very resistant.
Okay.
And it's quite interesting. Learning Pirate is now 5 years old, and the first 2 years into it, when I nearly gave up, because you realize that this is very new. It's very new. When we've designed learning, when we've looked at learning as a function, we've always looked at it, from a very holistic general sense, and we're basing it on our own educational experiences and how do we take in content, how do we manipulate that content, make it fun, engaging, like, bells, whistles, all the things.
Yeah.
But then when you look at it from the inside, how is the brain doing it? And then going even deeper, well, it's not just about learning. Learning is the act, but we're looking to stamp a memory. We're looking to create a memory through creating neural circuits in our brains, through growing pieces in our brains and changing the structure of it. And that changes everything. And, this is why when I do my keynotes and when I do workshops, I show people this is, what your actual brain is doing right now. As we're sitting here, as you're looking at me, your brain is doing so much, but it has to change physically in order for us to learn and to create a memory.
Mm-hmm.
That completely changes the game entirely. But as you can imagine, we've all sort of been conditioned in a very certain way as we're growing up through an educational system, as we, just figured out how to learn. We thought, well, this is the way that we're supposed to do it. And those habits and the behaviors that we created around them become very strong when you've done it for your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go into the space of, L&D in an organizational standpoint, where we've all had these same experiences, well, it can be like anything that you want to change, what's, a habit or behavior. It's going to be hard and you're going to be very resistant towards it.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, like we were talking about before, is I'll be invited in to, kick off global learning weeks and do all these wonderful things. I was like, wow, that's so cool. This is so interesting. They're like, okay, what do we do with it now? We're not sure. It's still at that sense of we're a little bit intimidated and we're not sure yet. So
Yeah. Well, I guess, the time and investment of time you have put into it, because it is, I guess, that bottomless pit, and then it becomes a challenge in its own right to try and communicate that in a way that people then understand it and want to put it in there. So I guess there's kind of that two bridges there. There's one before you can even get L&D to think about deploying their learning with all the things that you're talking about. It's actually having them think this way and understand what you're talking about and kind of relearn their craft, I guess, is it?
Oh, and it's exactly what I had. It was almost, I say this a lot, but it was really a humbling and almost embarrassing experience. Because the more I learned, I was like, how did I not know this? Like, seriously, how did I not know this? I've been an educator for, decades now. I've been designing learning for eons. Like, how did I not know this? But I didn't. I just didn't know it. Yeah. So, I think to wave my own white flag first, and, the two questions that at this point, I think I've asked, like, hundreds of thousands of people globally is, did anyone ever teach you how to learn? Well, probably not. And if they did, well, did anyone ever teach you about your brain? Okay, probably not. but that's the thing doing the learning.
Mm.
So imagine what happens when we educate ourselves and take away the learning side of it as well, right? This is a very personal journey of us learning about us as human beings. And when you do that, it's your entire world changes.
Mm.
It really does, because all of a sudden you can understand, oh my God, this is my executive function. And it's not just helping me to understand my logic and my reason and to help me problem solve. It's me as Lauren and Rob. This is the part of my brain that has cultivated me as a human being and that identifies me as my behavioral traits and patterns. Now that's expansive. Wait, what else is that part of my brain doing? Oh, it's telling my emotional processing center, who likes to get really upset sometimes, to like, we need you to calm down so we can think again.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. And while you're talking, and again, I am very much the layman when it comes to kind of talking about what obviously you are the expert of. But it makes me sort of think, when people are just like gym goers and they're working muscles in the body, that's one thing. But then the whole point of physical education and how that's changed in schools and unis over the year is the biology and the science of the body. How do the muscles respond to different types of exercise and activity? What do you need to do to them? What's the impact and what's happening within that in your body while you're doing that? The same with all different things, like just any sort of activity, medicines, all that sort of stuff. But you're right, when it comes to learning, we never kind of think, oh, what's happening to the brain when that is going in, or when we're learning something. I guess, and I guess this isn't a short answer to this, but what is happening?
Oh boy.
Loads of stuff. Go for it.
It's really, when you look at the brain in live imaging, right? And there is so much, because you've got the act of learning when we are sitting and we are focusing. Now, in order to really get into to learn, the gateway to learning is focus. Now, that is not an easy thing to do in this day and age. Focus is a skill that we need to cultivate, because no one ever taught us really how to do that. No, our teachers just expected us to like pay attention, and we're like, okay, how do you do that? So it is, focus in itself is really important to the act of learning, but how does the brain do that, right? There are, if I were to show you images, and you can kind of picture it like when you sometimes walk by a telephone pole and they've got the wires, that box with all the wires kind of like sticking out. That's kind of how I see our brains. There's so many different wires in there. And some of those wires represent different attentional networks. There's no one avenue to focus. There are multiple attentional networks in the brain. And what the brain does is it doesn't necessarily put a spotlight, right? People thought, oh, it's our executive function. We just like focus really hard and that part of the brain activates and boom, we can focus. But because we have all of these different attentional networks, there's a very particular part of the brain. I won't bother people with the actual name of it, but what it's doing is it's acting like a dimmer switch. And it's more dimming the other senses around you rather than one part of the brain going, no, about flashlight. And when you know that, now we transfer that over to learning. Well, what does that mean for us as human beings when we're learning? It means that we can activate our focus through harnessing our attentional networks. We can turn down the volume of things around us. We can sort of remove things from our environment. We can put blinders on like they do with like horses at the track if we need to. But we can also, on the internal aspect of it, from a chemical standpoint, because remember, we're governed by electricity and chemistry in our brains, and we can stimulate chemistry in our brains as well in order to help the process. So there's, so that's just one part to the act of learning. We have to be focused in order to do it, but then we don't want to overexhaust ourselves. And now we're going into cognitive load. The brain is expensive. Your brain is incredibly expensive, and its currency is energy. Yeah. And we have to, as a human, we need to be mindful of that when, through our day to day. As a learning development professional, we have to be very cognizant of that when we're designing learning or when we're implementing learning, because we want to be very protective of someone else's energy.
Oh, definitely. When you've just been describing that there, so you actually just said the word mindful, and it actually reminded me kind of in a subtext of mindfulness. But again, mindfulness is almost It almost feels like it's described often as a social science. We just need to create a bit of time, sit down, think about things, and everything will be okay. Just put ourselves in that zone. So it's really interesting to hear you, again, speaking about that more scientifically. There is a science and a chemistry almost to that focus.
Oh, yeah.
And how difficult that might be to actually get yourself to do that.
Oh, gosh, it's so difficult because we are highly inundated by the senses. And so, to regulate that and to, sort of put that dimmer switch on the things that we don't want to be paying attention to so that we can focus on the things that we do want to pay attention to, it does sort of take this harmonization. But it's something that I work at. I work at it daily. I literally work at it daily because I want to strengthen that ability. Now, I've cultivated a very strong practice of meditation, but Rob, that took me years to really drop into, because I found meditation really annoying. When I started, I was just like, this is torture. Yeah, I don't like all these thoughts are still going through my head. And, I'm thinking, how long is this? Or I'm listening to somebody on an app or on YouTube. I'm like, their voice is annoying me. That music is irritating. It takes
I feel it.
Right? I think a lot of people listening has probably had that experience, but like everybody else, until I learned that I don't have to go in for like 15, 20 minutes and go right, drop in right away. Like I had to cultivate, it's learning, had to cultivate the skill. Start small, work up. Well, if I don't want to meditate through sort of the avenues of listening to something, what else can I do? Because meditation is really about bringing yourself to a moment of present conscious awareness. And that, when it comes to us as human beings and learning, now we're going into a theory of metacognition. And metacognition is our ability to stop and think about what we are thinking about in the moment. And we can take that into the body as well to represent our feelings. It's not just about what we are thinking, is what is it that I am feeling? And I want to make a very clear distinction for people listening, because the word feeling and emotions are often very interchanged in our narratives. But when we look at it from a neuroscience perspective, we define emotions as the interaction between our chemistries in our brain. It's the actual what's happening in our brains, whereas our feelings are those tangible conscious experiences as a result of the action in the brain.
Wow, yeah, a completely different way of thinking about it, because you would just think about the same thing. We talk about emotional intelligence a hell of a lot, and then talk about your feelings. There you go, end of course. We move on. It's not that simple at all.
No, it's not. But I gotta say to everyone listening, even when I learned about that, when I learned, wait a second, my emotions are just a bunch of chemicals like swashing around in my brain and my feelings are just the experience of that happening. Well, that reframes things for me quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of makes I guess, again, my brain's now firing off and sort of making associations here. I'm thinking, there's so much in the world we've learned over the last decade or two when it comes to things like mental illness and the different things firing off and happening, and the chemical imbalances in people's brains at different things, and what's really needed and what's missing if you don't go and exercise, and etc. So it becomes massively important, and like you said, almost becomes, without the knowledge even, a little bit obvious that why haven't I been thinking about that? There's obviously stuff like that I need to learn. I need to learn other stuff, but I also need to learn.
Yes, I think we're very prescriptive. I mean, even if we take, when we saw everything that people were trying to do over the course of the last 3 years, when it came to the pandemic, it was very prescriptive without thinking, okay, we're going to offer everybody meditation, and we're going to offer everybody yoga, and we're going to offer everybody, here's some money for plants, and go for a walk and do all these things, but without taking that step back and saying, wait a second, I am currently in a state where I am completely overwhelmed. I'm probably incredibly stressed. My neurochemistry, and again, most people can't think like this, is that my neurochemistry from a standpoint of my acetylcholine, my norepinephrine, my cortisol, my dopamine, my serotonin, those are all playing a very large part in the way that I am behaving and feeling right now. But we don't have the knowledge. We're not taught these things.
No.
Just not taught these things. Now, it's interesting because the scientists who I work with, and when we talk about these things, it's kind of a double-edged sword for us, because we're very hyper aware.
Yeah.
We wake up on a bad day and we're like, oh, my serotonin low, I'm low, and my cortisol is about to spike because I'm feeling really anxious and I need to raise my dopamine. Like, it's a hyper awareness. So, not necessarily the greatest thing. But
when the next person might just be going, I need a coffee.
Yeah. And then we analyze the coffee. What's the coffee going to do to this and this and that? But
it makes complete sense that it's going to fire off all sorts of things, as I guess every experience does. With that focus thing, I found that particularly interesting because there's a piece I've run in workshops before that it's around, I guess it's linked to it because it's around attention. And I go, just think about certain things in history that you've been a part of, depending on people's age, and they'll kind of connect to one or two of these things. When we talk about watching the moon landing, or JFK being assassinated, or Princess Diana, Lady Diana finding out she was dead, the Queen most recently obviously passing away, 9/11, where were you when that happened? And most people, obviously, if they were alive at that time, were going, I know exactly where I was. I can remember it so vividly. And you kind of go, well, why? Why do you remember that so vividly? And to that point about focus and attention, it's because all the other distractions, all the other noises just went, because I was channeled completely into these stories and listening intently to every word coming in about them because I needed to know. And I guess, you could probably explain that a lot better than I can now in terms of, well, what's going on there then? And is that relevant?
I mean, we've got, there's a variety of different types of memory, and what you're referring to right now is an episodic memory. And when we're looking at memories of of events that are highly emotionally charged, we have some sort of like emotional, and now we can say, emotions do play basically a part in every cognitive function. And the emotional processing center, the amygdala, is, very active in helping us to stamp down memory. And, memory is consolidated in multiple parts of the brain. But we're talking about something that, number one, like you said, you're being inundated with the same thing from every angle that you look at, which means that when we're encoding a memory and when we're storing a memory, it's that repetition and that rehearsal that is strengthening that pathway, it's strengthening that circuitry. So if all you're doing is talking about it, reading about it, engaging with it, then you are encoding because you are storing it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to remember where you were. Now, if it was a very emotionally charged moment for you as well, then you're going to remember that as well. You mentioned 9/11. I know exactly where I was and what I was doing when that happened. And it's interesting because I haven't really thought about that for a while, but the moment that these words are coming out of my mouth, my internal visual system is giving me that visual memory of you were in the car driving back to uni, listening to the radio going, is this true? And then I remember getting to uni and no one there knew yet.
Yeah. Vivid.
Yeah. Incredibly.
And I guess, it's those, in the same way, there's those, whether it be when you get those sort of memories then invoked, that the songs that were on at the time, or the smells even. How many times can you say something, remember a barbecue, and you can smell the burger burning? That's one of my barbecues. It's just burning away. But you can evoke all those senses as well. And again, that obviously the smell isn't there. So it must be, it's the brain again.
It's the memory. It's, again, these phenomenal 3 pounds of gelatinous, things that we carry up above us. It's so phenomenal. And, if I were to go back and, and do a PhD and do my full sort of dissertation, I would never come out of the rabbit hole of research when it comes to memory.
Yeah.
It is so extensive, and it's interesting, just so people have an idea, when a neuroscientist is exploring something, and a neuroscientist will specialize, and choose that one thing. I heard it described really well the other day by a colleague, but you choose that one thing, and you have to be incredibly passionate and almost obsessive about wanting to know the answer to the one question of what does this do, or does it do the thing that I'm hypothesizing that it does?
Yeah.
And the scientists will sometimes spend, we talk about, when we compare this to organizational work and projects, we go into an organization, we've got a project that most might go on for a year. Whereas a scientist might look at this for up to 5 years, 10 years, and they get to the end of that road and be like, oh, well, that was for nothing. That didn't work out the way we wanted to. So it's an extensive process, but memory in itself, when you look at the abundance of different ways that we encode a memory, the different parts of the brain that are activated, what happens when a specific part of the brain, the hippocampus, for example, which is very well known for the initial sort of stop on your pathway to encoding a long-term memory. You know, when we see degenerative diseases, you know, what happens? Why we start losing memories as we get older? Well, we know these things, and we are yet to know even more, because again, we're scratching the surface on the brain itself and what we can learn.
Well, 100% we are. It's really interesting when you look at L&D teams and learning teams. There's that battle. I don't just see it inside L&D teams. I see it with L&D experts that are all over social media, in that battle between, we need to come away from trying to get people to remember things and just give them a bunch of resources so they can find it when they need it. And then there's the other sort of camp that kind of starts going, well, the thing is, you're giving them too many resources now, so they can't actually do the job, because they don't know anything about it naturally, because they have to look up these resources every time. That's far too complicated and takes too long. They need to remember stuff. So let's go down that route. Is that a conversation that you have when you speak?
It's maddening. And what you're describing to me is absolute madness. And it was again, my journey through all of this. When I started, one of the hardest things when I started learning, when I started getting my own credentials in neuroscience, you know, I was an adult. I was a chief learning officer. I was very far up in my career. I thought I knew what I was doing, and like, no. Lesson number one about learning: it's hard. It is hard, and you don't realize that until you start to unpack the process of how to learn, which we were all never taught. Majority, maybe not all, most of us were never taught how to learn. And what drives me, you know, absolutely mad, Rob, is that we see it all over LinkedIn, all over, you know, the articles, magazines, you know, upskill. Let's upskill everybody. I said, well, would it not make sense to teach people first how to learn?
Yeah.
Let's teach people how to learn. And, you know, this is my domain. This is what I want to see happening within the industry. And, you know, from my specialization, it's very, very not only critical, but it's immensely valuable to integrate. This is the brain. We're going to go this from a very scratch surface, like fundamental levels, to make you understand how this thing just kind of on a basic level operates, right? It's like if you were to get a car, here are the keys, there's the pedals, here's the steering wheel. Okay, I have a good understanding of what this thing does. Let's do that with the brain. And then let's look at strategies, methodologies, and why they are effective, but when you can use them and when they will be more effective versus this isn't the right area. Now, I always wondered, Rob, when I started this, you know, in the first 2 years, there was so much frustration, because to me, this all makes perfect sense. It's, why don't we want to teach people how to learn so that they can sort of take in that autonomy when they're in their organizations? And so they're not spinning their tails or their heads anymore going, I just can't figure this out. I'm just going to go Google it really quickly. And then I'm going to forget it again. And then when I need it, I'm going to go YouTube something. Okay, I'm going to forget that again. I'm going to go see Jimmy over in accounting because I can't remember how to put my pay system in. Okay, how many hours are we losing? You know, you want to talk about ROI for any of my leaders out there, or my, like, you know, people who are concerned about ROI. Let's talk about how many hours people are losing going back to learn something, and not even learn it, just to find the answers for something that they never learned effectively in the first place.
Yeah.
And I love my L&D teams. I was one of them, but I'm sorry, people, if we don't start waving the white flag and going, we don't know. We were never taught how to learn. Let's start here. So that we can be better ourselves. We can design better for the people who we're trying to help. It makes no sense to me that that's not, you know, very, very high on the list of things that we need to do in L&D in order to move the industry forward.
So I guess it's like digging into one of the points you've just made there is, why are we so resistant to it in organizations? Now, I've got a bunch of answers that are flying around in my head, but I want to hear I want to hear your view on that and what you've experienced.
Time and money.
Yeah.
It's the old that. So I think it's time, it's money. Learning like this does take more time. And when you see why, when you understand the process of memory and what it takes to truly get something. And when I say memory, I'm not talking about we're memorizing things that we can, it's not that. It's not us in uni cramming the night before so that we can pass our test the day after. This is, let's take away memory and let's just call this, we are upgrading ourselves as fundamental humans in our abilities to do things.
Like it.
That's what it is. Take away the learning. It is about us as fundamental humans learning more about ourselves so that we operate more efficiently.
Yeah.
And it takes time.
It does. And one of my things I love to say is that we are always learning. So whether we like it or not, something's always happening. We're always learning something. So kind of like if you kind of piece that together, then this idea that we are then going to go, right, today we're going to do some learning. Well, I was going to do some learning anyway. I might not have been aware of it, but we're all going to do that. So this is now being able to, I guess, more consciously try to give that the rails and the guidance to learn towards where we're trying to get to.
Exactly. And there's so many practical and valuable applications. There are a lot of people out there in the learning world who I don't think, first of all, they don't have the credentials, they don't have the knowledge, and they're very resistant when we say neuroscience.
Yeah.
And, I'm all for a good, healthy debate, but when you say neuroscience has no place in learning and neuroscience has no place in learning design, well, you're saying that the brain has no place in it. And that's preposterous. That's absolutely preposterous.
And I guess that's holding L&D just in its own right there, because this isn't just about learning the brain and neuroscience. It's got something to do with everything that we do, whether we're in L&D, whether we're in sales or tech or leadership, whatever we're doing in business and outside of business.
Absolutely.
It's all there.
Absolutely. And maybe that's, that's part of the discomfort and the vulnerability of, I have to now learn more about me as the fundamental human being that I am. And that is scary. It's scary and it's frustrating. It's so maddening. I started my studies in neuroscience. I knew nothing about the brain. I knew nothing about science. And there I am, I guess I was 35 at the time, reading textbooks like I was a 5-year-old kindergarten reading for the first time.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable. It didn't feel good. And I was like upset and I was crying and I'm like angry. I'm throwing things at a professor on my screen who can't hear me.
Why didn't you tell me this 30 years ago?
It's that, but it's like, why is this so hard? Damn. And I think that's part of it. And, it really is, I really do. And I don't understand now. I know that from a lot of industry leaders and that I've spoken to, it's always coming down to budgets as well. It's such a shame that the people in organizations who are responsible to help other people learn aren't getting budgets for them to learn themselves.
Yeah. And I guess that's an interesting point you made there about them learning themselves, because I guess the other side of this is that, there are a number of well-trodden avenues for learning professionals to go down in terms of their learning, their accreditations, learning their craft, which then is they provide the stamps to basically go, I'm an expert in what I do. I am an expert L&D professional, or whatever that might be, whatever string, plus all your experience. That's great. And I guess, there is always that little bit of someone else coming along and like bringing something else to the table that I don't know, that challenges, am I an expert after all?
No, none of us are experts, really. There's always something new to learn.
Which is what the irony is, that the L&D will kind of preach to the rest of the world that there's always that growth mindset, but sometimes we don't.
There is, but I also think, and I feel this, I feel this way too. It's like, because there's always something more to learn. It's like, do I ever really know enough? Do I ever feel like enough? Do I ever know enough? Am I really doing enough? And it's the answer, like you said, if you have that growth mindset, it's we turn that into learning itself. But there shouldn't be this hoarding of knowledge, or there shouldn't be this, like, I'm the expert in data, I'm the expert in design, it doesn't make sense. We are here to share our knowledge and to grow with one another. And if we have this internal threat and competition, we're not going anywhere. And I think that a part of the reason And I spent several years in organizations globally. I jumped around a lot in my career, and I just didn't see the drive to really want to evolve and change because people didn't fight for it. You didn't fight for the seat at the table. You didn't, and fight for the time that is really needed to develop something spectacular to make change across an organization that will truly transform how people look and see and develop. But when you sit at the table and you just keep taking the orders and you keep scaling back, right? Because, well, it's what the department wants. I have all these great ideas and I know that this is not the right way to go about this, but you're just saying this is what you want. This is what you want. And we don't fight back enough. And I think this is why we're in the position that we're in now.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the status quo has a habit of coming back and punching twice as hard as it was punching before, just to try and get you back into it. It's a tough one because I guess that's the third part then. So they've got time is always a blocker, and then other resources like money tends to be the blocker. But the third part now we're talking about is that kind of the attitude or the purpose or the fire in the belly to actually want to make a difference and do this. That's kind of something that I talk about quite a lot in terms of L&D teams. It is that why do we want to be? Why do we keep falling into these traps of just the old ways of working? Taking the orders, delivering what people have asked us for. And I find more and more, even for the last, I would say most of my career, 20 years in L&D, that there is always that one or two people in those teams that have this desire to want to do something different. But even them eventually get knocked back, or dare I say, get knocked out, get pushed away. Trying to, because the pressure externally of just do what we've done all the time, get it done quickly, time, money, pressures again, just get it done.
And it's immensely demoralizing when you have a passion and a desire to sincerely want to help someone through your craft, because that's what you're there for. But you and I were talking about this before, is that when you come to the table, and you're right, there are people, I have met many chief learning officers, many of my colleagues who are in those senior level positions who want this. And by the time they finish advocating for it and get something down to the teams, it's been so watered down. That it completely takes away from what they wanted to do.
What have we got the time for? We can't do all of that. It's going to take far too long. To get everyone in the L&D team and the organization thinking in that sort of way. So what we'll do instead is we'll just go and get a license for Storyline and do an e-learning. How about that?
Oh, maddening. I got to say though, there's hope. And I don't want it for people listening, sort of to you're like, oh, we're screwed. It's over. Forget it.
No, there's always hope. Go. There's hope.
For every, let's say, 100 keynotes that I've done where I'm talking about the science of learning, I'm talking about, the science of learning design, which is just, that's my happy place. Oh my God, it's happy and it's maddening at the same place, but my God, I love it. When you're learning and you are just always thinking about what that brain is doing and what it wants and how it's going to do it, it is just fascinatingly phenomenal. And for every 100 keynotes I've done, and it's a very sad percentage for me to even articulate, but if I even do 3 workshops with the teams afterwards, those teams and those leaders, they're the ones who are, they're going to move the needle. They're going to move it a little bit slower. But I just finished working with the team. I'm not going to say who the organization is. They're large, though. They're very large. And the team was a small team in one of the geographies, and we did the science of learning interactive. And then they say, hey, we'd love you to come and share more because we want to design better. We want to facilitate better. I said, absolutely, let's do this. And I spaced it out. We used science. We did it. It was absolutely wonderful. And then one of them wrote me a message. She's like, hey, I'm designing something and I really want to do this, but I'm kind of not sure about that. And can you give me the science behind it? And that elated me. I was like, yes. And I'm like, these are the organizations that are going to put the other ones, in their dust.
Yeah, and it's that understanding that that isn't the end of the journey, right? We've had training. Now we had a workshop with Lauren, so we can do it. No. That's there's so much more to then do to get this working.
Peace. You know, and even I you know, I'm gonna you know put my foot in my own mouth, which is that one workshop wasn't even going to be enough either. You know, there's way too much to know, and there's way too much to share. But you know, when you give somebody these like, you know, the intimacy with the brain is one thing, but then say, okay, let's look at the way that you've been designing your learning. Let's look at the way that you've been facilitating it. Now let's look at it from a standpoint of, okay, has it been too engaging? Have you been using reward too much? Well, what does that mean? Okay, this is what that means. So now you know that you've got to go back into your design and take some of that out. Has it been overly emotionally charged? And which way has it been emotionally charged? And if it is, okay, let's look at how are we using like the evocation of feelings to help the memory. Okay, great. Have you put too much content in? The answer is always yes. The answer is always yes. You put too much content in. Yeah. How do we scale that back and then help the brain focus on what's important? Going back to our beginning conversation. When you know about attention, how does that change the way that you are designing for someone to help them focus?
Yeah,
it changes everything. So, you know, for everyone out there who's listening right now, my designers who have always questioned, what's the value of neuroscience and learning design? Well, I just gave you a bunch of great points right there. When you know that the memories are being consolidated during deep rest and sleep, then you know that someone's not going to remember something and transfer it instantly. That's why there's spaced repetition. But when are you using your spaced repetition? Yeah. There's a science to this. There are formulas that we can put into place that make these things more effective.
Just designing stuff to give people the time to actually take it on, practice it, register it, reflect on it, go again, try it something again, instead of this constant perpetual cycle. And I think it's, you know, it's busyness, isn't it? There's this, I chuckled to myself when you said there's always too much content, because I fall into this trap sometimes myself. And I think most designers, they look at themselves, we kind of go, right, we've got that much time, so therefore we need to make sure there's enough content for that amount of time. So they want a 2 hour, I don't know, a 30-minute e-learning. What's the content that's going to do that? Well, you know what? There could be 2 minutes of content and 28 minutes worth of personal reflection based on the questions that are in that e-learning. That would still be half an hour, and it'd be a great use of half an hour potentially. Although, to your point, it would probably be too much. 2 minutes, maybe in 28 minutes. But people, I guess it's that busyness and that almost, dare I say, that insecurity sometimes of teams like L&D to go, if all we produce is something that lasts a day, but essentially only has 2 little bits to it, and the rest of it is people having a think and having a talk and having a reflect, is that us showing value? Well, the value isn't about you producing stuff. The value is the effect it has on the people, and then the effect that they go on and to have.
Yes. You know, when we look at what is it that we're trying to learn and why, right? Are we looking to change a behavior? Are we looking to change an ability? Are we trying to transfer knowledge? Are we trying to, you know, encode something in our motor, you know, in our motor cortex because we want to physically be able to do something differently now? Why? And how is it going to be transferred? Tangibly tell me, how is this going to be transferred? Because if you can't answer that question for me, then why are you spending all that time learning that thing that you can't even answer how it's going to be transferred and how it's going to produce the result that you're looking for it to produce?
Yeah. And how is it aligned to it? I mean, I literally, for people on YouTube, about 2 minutes before I started speaking to you, Lauren, I had a big picture up there about loads of little squiggly lines going everywhere, and then something that like a vision and a mission in the side in the middle, then everything came out nice and straight the other side. I'm like going, how is this pointing? How is this aligned? Are we learning stuff? Do we know how and why our roles are even there? Do we know why L&D exists in that organization? Do we know why the roles that L&D are trying to affect, how they contribute to the vision and the mission and the customers that they're trying to serve? Or are we having a nice day out and learning some stuff?
it was something that frustrated, like I said, like going back to my initial frustrations. And, I think at one point, I was very verbal and saying, because I was just, I want better for people. I want to see our industry evolve. I want to see education as a whole. I want to see my niece who's 6 years old have a better grasp on her own learning and see the system change from the education right it through organizations. But when it came to our organizational learning, and I just couldn't get through to the people who were holding the power within the organizations, my internal voice went, you know what? F it. And like, if I say, L&D, you got two choices. Choice number one, I would love to come in and show you how these things really work and how you can use them to elevate your function in L&D, make your designers better designers, help people to have these strategy sessions with the organization a lot better, and sell, because we do have to sell in organizations, sell that into the people you need to sell it in with. There's option number one. Option number two is I can go to the rest of the organization and say, how would you like it if I taught everybody here how to learn? And they could design their own learning. And guess what? They probably wouldn't need L&D anymore.
Yeah. And that's the scary point, that people in L&D are probably listening is going, no, I was with you until I don't want it anymore. Leave me alone.
I think we can be harmonious. I think it can be both, right? I think we can teach designers, facilitators, and we can teach the L&D departments how to upskill themselves so they can produce more engaging, effective, transferable learning. But we can also enable and empower us as human beings to understand, how do we learn more effectively ourselves? How do we upskill ourselves in the actual act of learning? And that way, when the two come together, wow, explosively powerful.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't have to be one or the other. It really shouldn't.
Absolutely. And, I even go back to just thinking about even just the schools that our children go to. I just kind of go, well, you know what, if only they were learning how to at primary school, learning how to learning how to have conversations, learning about self-reflection, all these sort of things, how much more effective would they be at loads of life skills, let alone just the learning and the memories and all that sort of stuff by the time that they got to high school?
Oh, I've been teaching my niece. So my niece, because I go over there every year. I've got she's 6 years old now. The eldest is 9, and the youngest is turning 4. And I'm there every week, and I'll sometimes I'm working, and she would see all these brains rotating on my screen. Just she would plop down next to me by when she was 3, and was just like curious. What is this? Like, what is this thing? And so I just started teaching her. I started teaching her from the little age of 3, and we would sit and we would draw pictures of the brain, and little by little, I'd be introducing her to different parts of it. And I started recalling this story to someone else the other day. I was over at my sister's, and those for any of the parents out there, those like plastic play structures, like they look like little houses. I see her sitting on top of it with her fingers sort of waving in the air, like giving a lecture to a bunch of other kids. I'm like, oh God, okay. I'm like, she's being a little jerk. So I got to go over there. I got to manage this. And I walk over, and there she is. She's not being a little jerk. She's teaching them about, she's like, Amy gets really upset, and then Corey needs to tell Amy that she needs to calm down. And that's the language that I've given her. For Corey is her prefrontal cortex, and Amy is her amygdala.
Oh, wow.
So
That's
she was
amazing.
teaching them on, if you get upset, Corey needs to tell her, it's okay, we're okay, you just need to calm down. I'm like, yeah, girl.
Brilliant. I'm going to start sending you into the organizations now. Go tell them.
Yeah. But I mean, it's wonderful that I get to teach her from a very young age.
Yeah.
But we didn't learn these things. So now everybody in our, the elder groups here, we need to learn it too.
Yeah.
And if anything, if the pandemic taught us anything, it was that at one point or another, it didn't matter, even if you were a medical professional, psychologist, psychiatrist, someone like me who's neuroscience, we passed our coping mechanisms.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't even imagine, people who didn't know as much as some of us did, how hard it was, because, we were never taught. We were never taught. What does it mean when that part of my brain is literally hijacked the rest of me? And then all of a sudden my body is in like a ball of tension, and my cortisol levels and my norepinephrine is going through the roof. And I'm like sitting on my couch crying, and I can't get up for days. There is a plethora of all of that happened. And I'm going to say this for anyone who's listening, we're not done yet. The ripple effect of all of this is still very, very, very much happening. People haven't recovered from this.
No.
It's going to take years for some.
Yeah, 100% it is. Yeah. I think I'm putting myself back into that kind of L&D corporate mindset for a second, and I'm going, you know what, when these sort of big ideas come along for me, and I'm going, well, you know, I can just imagine going to my boss or chief stakeholder, and we're going, right, let's do all this differently. That's where the fear and the scaredness is going to fits in. So my mind goes to, how could we run some sort of experiments in this? How could we have just certain teams and individuals or department, whatever it might be, just to try something different? And I guess this might play into some of those few percent that you talk about from the talks that then go away and go, wow, we're going to do something with this. What sort of things are people actively doing that starts getting those juices flowing in this way and starts turning heads in an organization?
We got myself and he's one of my board members, Dr. Chris Lee. We decided it was over the course of the pandemic, that I personally shifted from learning and the learning sciences to, okay, we need to help humans. We have the knowledge, we need to shift. We really need to help humans on a fundamental human level. And somehow I designed it, and we put together this training and these learning interventions to go into these sessions on, okay, we're going through a lot right now, everybody. But we don't really know how to deal with this or why it's happening and why we're reacting, how we can sort of work with that. And so this program we lovingly call it How to Human, right? It's like how to human. And it was really based on grounding ourselves in 3 areas, which is monitoring and regulating our emotions, our behaviors, and the cognition. And from a human standpoint, because I don't want to talk about leaders, I don't want to talk about employees or managers or senior. No. We are humans. There is no title when it comes to, to learning these things. It's us as fundamental human beings. Take away the hierarchy, take away the title. And that, Rob, had the greatest impact on the organizations that we worked with, because it was all of a sudden, I can monitor myself. I can regulate myself. I'm understanding that there is a reaction happening at the speed of light in my brain that is making me feel this way or making me act or do this. And when we gave those leaders that conscious awareness, and then we started helping them to develop and cultivate the skill, we had to cultivate the skill over time. And this was usually we were doing this over 3 months, to acknowledge it within themselves first, put into the practices of down regulation, which is through breathing, it's through the havening techniques. There's so many different practices, but to first do it for us, human to human. And then we can look at the other person across the room on our Zooms and seeing, ooh, okay, I can see that something in emotions are happening there, and there is a very tangible feeling that is being reactive. I can now readjust how I'm going to respond to that. I can downregulate myself if it's triggering me. And this human awareness of everything completely changes the game. So we've heard a lot over the past few years about increasing empathy in organizations, trust, resilience. Well, guess where these all begin? Yeah.
Makes complete sense. That, I think you hit the nail on the head when you go hierarchy, titles. We've become almost slaves to those sort of things. L&D we've just talked about. We think we must be the experts in that. Leaders so many times go, oh my God, now I'm a leader of people. How do I distinguish myself to what I was yesterday? How do I lead? How do I get them to follow? Now I'm at the head of an organization. What do I need to act like? And then maybe we dip our toes into certain things that are kind of like a stepping stone to where you are. When we look at things like psychometrics, and we kind of go, oh well, we'll do insights, we'll do DISC, and other psychometric tools are available. But then we kind of start going, well, I am that, so therefore because I am that color, you need to do this in my way, and I need to do that. And hang on a minute, no, we're not colors, we're not letters, we're not titles, we are humans. Now, kind of for those on YouTube, and I don't know whether you'll be able to see it, or it's a bit small on the board just out there. And I kind of go, there's 4 different ways in which we kind of do these things. There's the managing, leading, guiding, and inspiring. And we think those are different things that we're going to be doing to people and employees. But they're not. I kind of go, well, you don't manage people, you manage things. Right. So that aside, that's cool. And then when we slip into leadership, then that's normally about your people. And then guiding, that's normally because we need to guide employees in a certain direction because of the business, what we're doing. But the bit you're tying into really here is when I go over the far side of that diagram, it's the inspire piece. You don't inspire people or employees or things, you inspire humans.
Yeah.
And there's that kind of command and clarity behind that kind of that leadership that goes from the front, that hero leadership quality that starts going, okay, how do we really get the best out of you? And what I love is start to recognize something within yourself, then be able to start to manage it and lead yourself because you recognize it.
Yeah.
You know, you can't go to how many times do I hear, oh, I've got imposter syndrome. Well, yeah, I take 2 tablets a day. And you'll be better tomorrow. Go on a course about emotional intelligence. You'll be a much better leader. No, you won't. No, it's not about just being told how to be a better leader. It's sit down and reflect about, well, what does that mean?
You have to. We are so good at just giving everybody the why without the how. You know, and it's the same. We go back. It doesn't. You know, you go back to when you're a child. You go back even to now. You know, you see someone what you believe to be overreacting, and you look at the. You know, you'd be like, okay, you need to calm down. First of all, worst thing to say ever to anybody.
Yeah.
But then it's okay. Yeah, you need to do this. How do I do that? I am literally being governed right now by oodles of cortisol coursing through my system. And you're telling me to calm that down. How do I do that?
Yeah.
Because you telling me to calm down sure ain't working.
Yeah.
Okay, go for a walk. Okay, maybe that's walking great, exercise good, but it's my mind is still on fire. My mind is still furious. And when my mind is still replaying that over and over again, guess what? Those chemicals are being released over and over and over again, which means I am still living in that.
Yeah.
And that means I'm still feeling that. How do I handle that?
Yeah.
How do I then work with, I say that you don't control anything in the brain. And that's why my language is you join forces with it.
Love that. Join
forces with it. I do this constantly. And whether that's to downregulate yourself when you're having an emotional stat and you want to be able to, you know, articulate yourselves better. Yes, maybe you need to remove yourself from the environment because the environment is being triggering as well. But without the how, you're still in the same place. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that recognition and that kind of how to control it, because it got me thinking then again, it's like something as simple as, okay, I know I should stop eating these Pringles now I'm halfway down the tube. but I can't. I know I shouldn't watch another episode of 24 before I go to bed, but I have to. It's like, it's just, even, I know these are kind of like trivial examples, but it's like going,
but they're
again,
not.
You are again going, I'm not in control of this now. Something else is, but we just kind of
and then, you know, the scientist me goes, you know, it's fine. I was literally just talking about this yesterday. I was walking by, if there's any of my fellow people listening to this who are in Toronto, there is a shop downtown Toronto called Le Gourmand, and they've got the most delicious cookies in the world. It's like, but I made the mistake one day of asking them. I said, how many calories are in this cookie? And I was like, and we're done with the cookie.
Never ask the question.
We're done with the cookie. And even, you know, myself, the working with circadian rhythms, working with light exposure for better sleep. Should I be watching YouTube or looking at my phone in bed or doing any of that, which I do not do. I absolutely do not do. But why shouldn't I do it? Okay, because I am governed by electricity that is being stimulated in my brain when I am looking at this. It's also telling my brain that this is a different time of the day when I am looking at this particular light. So I shouldn't do that. And yet, you know, sometimes it's midnight and I'm still watching Netflix. Grain of salt, everybody. We're not perfect. But when you know all of these things. I'm not saying that it's going to help you to like just instantly change. That didn't to me. I still procrastinate. I still, bang my head against the board sometimes when I know, hey, you need to get up. You are not being effective right now with what you're doing. Your brain is now in this mode. And I'll still sit there for another minute or two until I like get up. And the key is, and I want to sort of explain to everybody just, because I know we're running out of time, is it's all about keep building on and cultivating the skill. Right? It doesn't happen quickly when we're talking about us as human developments and these fundamental skills. But what I promise you will happen is that I called them the moments of YAR. It's the moments of you are really ready. You'll recognize when you're like, oh my God, I just did that faster. I recognize that. And that's when that feedback comes into play. It's like, I'm proud of myself. Okay, great. I wasn't able to pull myself off the couch as fast as I want to, but I recognized where I was faster, and man, that's amazing. That's what we want to cultivate, that higher awareness, because I'm now understanding what is the operational system doing? Can I be aware of it? And now can I join forces with it to move forward?
The word that's springing to mind as you're talking is almost like we're troubleshooting. It's like I'm kind of thinking, the Wi-Fi is not working in the back room. What we're going to do in here? And it could be the device, it could be the router, it could be the wall, it could be the cable, it could be anything. And only by doing one of those things at a time, mindfully, and checking it out and seeing what the difference is, am I going to start to get any sort of benefit or result? And the Wi-Fi is a little bit better now. I've changed that, but something else might need to change as well.
Yeah.
But it's exactly with the cells. How can I start to think differently about that? What are the little changes I need to make to really think? And I'm a really bad one for sitting there on the phone in the evening, watching TV, sitting on the phone, and I can sleep on I think as a clothesline is the saying that we use. But at the same time, my daughter will be going, "Oh, I'm not tired. I'm not going to sleep yet." Well, you are watching Netflix for the last 6 hours running. That's probably
And I think it's not just about the thinking. I think that's the other thing. The mind doesn't change the mind, right? Yeah. We need to do. And this is, you can think all you want, but until you do, it's not going to change.
100%. Love that. That I've learned a lot through that conversation there, and I'm actually going to say, I want to speak to you again about loads of stuff. It doesn't even have to be a podcast. Let's just keep chatting.
Absolutely, be happy to.
I love that conversation. Thank you so much for coming along to that. I guess this is the point, obviously, towards the end of the show now, where I always go, Leadership Untitled, based on what we've been talking about, what should we call this episode of the show? Have you got any ideas based on where we've been going?
I mean, my trademark is joining forces with your brain.
Joining forces with your brain. I love that. That's what it's going to be. We're doing
that's a Learning Pirate trademark, and there's a series that's going to be coming out entitled just that, Joining Forces with Your Brain.
Love it. And Lauren, if people are inspired, and let's face it, if they're still listening at this point, I think they are. If people are inspired to learn more about what you do, or reach out, or just follow you for a while, where's the best place for them to do that?
Well, I like to cause big stinks on LinkedIn. That's my jam. And my team is encouraging me to do more on the Twitter. From my younger audience, yes, I will be getting on TikTok. That's my uncomfortable learning is I will be getting on TikTok, but LinkedIn, and then the Learning Pirate website is where we are going to be making the big announcements, but Joining Forces with Your Brain, the series, is going to be released very soon.
Very soon. Keep an eye on that one. So what I will do, Lauren, and to the listeners out there, I'll put links to all those that you've just mentioned onto the show notes, so people can get to those dead easy from wherever they're listening or watching this. So all that remains is thank you again for coming today. Really enjoyed that conversation. Keep pirating.
Yar.
Brilliant stuff. Have a fantastic weekend, and we're definitely going to speak to you again soon.
Absolutely. Take care, Rob.
See you now. Bye-bye. And that's it from this episode of the Leadership Untitled podcast. This episode is called Joining Forces with Your Brain, named after Lauren's programme of the same name, as well as a fantastic chat that we've had today. All that remains is my thanks again to Lauren for speaking with me today, and for all you guys for listening out there in podcast and YouTube land. Until next time, have a great day.